Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on today's webinar on 5 ways to fix your resume for the new year. We have a fantastic guest speaker today, Hallie Crawford. So before we get started, as usual, I always like to cover a few housekeeping items. So if you can hear me, if you will just use the little palm button to raise your hand and let me know that the technology is working, that you can hear me okay. Perfect. I'm seeing lots of hands come up. That's awesome. Great. Just note that we will be doing some polls today, so we'd love your participation. And we will have you ask some questions at the very end that I'll be facilitating for Hallie. And then the last thing that I always get a question about is this is being recorded, and you will actually get an email this afternoon with the recorded included. If you attended Tuesday's webinar, that was my fault. I'm filling in for Callie DeWalt. This is Bethany Mills, and I forgot to include the recording. So lesson learned, you know, first time at it in a while. So I'll make sure that that's in there this afternoon for folks to watch that recording later. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a quick introduction of Hallie, and then I'll turn it over to her. So our presenter, Hallie Crawford, has been a certified career coach and national career expert for 19 years. Her company, HallieCrawford.com, and team of coaches have helped thousands of people worldwide identify and transition into their dream career, effectively navigate their job search, and enhance their performance at work. Hallie is regularly featured as a career expert in the media, including U.S. News, Forbes.com, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox Business News. And for more information about her services, you can go to HallieCrawford.com. It's just such a pleasure to introduce Hallie, as she and I have worked together quite a bit over the last 4 to 5 years. So happy just to turn it over to Hallie and let her share her expertise with us today.
Thanks, Bethany. That was perfect. Very glad to be here with you all today. And we greatly appreciate your time, especially on what most likely is, for a lot of you, your lunch hour. So thanks for being here. So as Bethany said, I'm Hallie Crawford. I'm a certified career coach and the founder of my own company that I started when I was in my late 20s. So as I talk here today, I know some of you will probably be thinking, she sounds like she's 12. How is that possible? I'm actually 47 and just have a very young voice, for better or for worse. And we are going to be talking about 5 ways to fix your resume. And I added this little nugget here about for the new year, because I still think it's, you know, Happy New Year, at least until the end of February. I'm going to keep saying that to people. And this is a great time to actually begin to update and improve your materials for job search purposes, or whether it's for branding purposes for some of you, or even if you want to make or feel like you want to make a career transition, whether it's something that's immediate or later on. We are going to give you 5 basic steps and things that you need to be considering in order to update and fix up your resume. So if we take a look at this first slide here, the reason why we're talking today is because we don't want you to be like this woman on the screen here on the left. We totally get, having done this for so many years, that updating your resume can not be the most fun thing for people. A lot of people don't enjoy doing it. And I get that. I understand it. Because a lot of our clients will tell us, gosh, this is completely overwhelming. They don't know where to start and how to begin, and they just would rather avoid it than, you know, dig into it. They're not really sure in some cases too, like what formatting to use. And we still get a lot of resumes come through with our newer clients that kind of look like 1980s, right? So formatting is also very important and part of what we're going to talk about today. They're overwhelmed too because they don't know what to include, and some people feel like, gosh, I'm not a good writer, like I don't know how to say the right things. So the good news is we are here to help. This is our website here, and my undergraduate degree is from Vanderbilt University, and I have a graduate degree from the University of Illinois, also in communications. So for me, I actually have an affinity for helping people with their resumes and updating their materials because of that background that I have as well. And just by the way, too, I wanted to point something out on the slide here. We have a lot of free tools on our website that I encourage you to take advantage of on our career blog at the top right here, and then also in our career tools section. There's a lot of good free kind of bonus material that you can download and leverage, okay? So I totally get it. and how intimidating this can feel and frustrating. So we're going to help you with some 5 basic steps to improve it. We all understand, I'm sure, which is why you're here today, why having a really solid, good resume is so important. Employers and recruiters still only spend around 10 to 15 seconds looking at someone's resume, and it's a quick scan to determine if they want to bring you in for an interview, to determine if they even want to, read further or look you up on LinkedIn. So they are looking really, really quickly at your material, which is why it needs to stand out from the crowd, but also be very easy to read and kind of visually appealing to the eye, because then they'll actually want to read it psychologically, if you will. And, an average corporate job opening still today attracts around 250 resumes, give or take. So again, this is part of why this is so important and what we're going to be talking about today. So there are 3 criteria I wanted to share with you. And after we do a poll, our first poll in just a moment here, I am going to show you what our agenda is for today on the next slide, the next couple of slides. But one of the things I want you to really think about is, these criteria on the slide here. Does your resume really represent you in terms of these areas? And we're going to poll you about this in just a moment. Does it sell you? Obviously, we all know this, it needs to sell you. But also, if you look at the second one, does it really brand you effectively too? This is the piece that a lot of people will miss, because they don't realize that, okay, not just in terms of selling me does it need to be good and make me look and sound good, it needs to articulate to the prospective employer, like, who you are, what your brand is, what your elevator speech is. And a lot of people kind of miss this subtle nuance. So we are going to talk about that today. And then finally, we really want you to feel confident about your resume. So kind of the third criteria here is that you feel more confident as a job seeker as a result of having your resume updated and in better shape. So let's go ahead and do this poll here. If we could, Bethany, I almost said Hallie, Bethany, if we could, and if you could open that up and then just read me the results when we've got them, that'd be great. One of the things I did want to say as you all are completing this poll for us, please, is, there are lots of different formats out there for resumes, and I'll show you a couple of examples today. But part of what you need to think about is you want to have a format for your resume that feels good to you, that represents who you are and like your personality type, as well as what would be good and appealing for your industry or a prospective employer, okay? And that's definitely an important piece of that confidence, area of it, because at the end of the day, once your resume is updated and in better shape, it should have made you feel like a much more confident job seeker, like you're clear about your strengths and what you bring to the table and everything else. So you should walk out of that kind of updating session, if you will, feeling a lot more confident in yourself. So please complete that poll for us, and then Hallie will read me the results, because technology-wise, I can never find where the results are. And I can't see them as well, even with my glasses. Part of getting old.
All right, so we've got almost 100%, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and then share those results.
Okay,
so
great.
It looks like 31% said yes, that they do feel that their resume represents them correctly, and then 69% said no. Very interesting.
Okay. That is interesting, and I do want you all to think about, thanks for sharing that, Bethany, and everyone for participating too. And I do want you all to think about these 3 criteria as you're, going through the action steps that we talk about after our webinar today, but also to help you think about and frame out, like, kind of having the right perspective on the tips that we're going to give you too. Because like I said, a lot of people will get the, oh yeah, it needs to sell me, duh, but they'll forget about the branding piece, and they won't understand that, the formatting and everything else needs to make them feel that much better. So here's our basic agenda on the next slide here. 5 ways and kind of categories that you need to think about in order to update your resume is the formatting, the branding like we talked about. You have to have some kind of profile summary at the top. I'll show you an example in a few slides here. You need to think about the relevancy of everything that you have said in your resume for each specific job you are applying for. Yes, you tailor your resume for every single job, absolutely. It should not be that hard to do so though, because your resume should be in such good shape that you're more just kind of taking out some keywords that aren't as relevant for that particular job and changing those for ones that would be relevant. Okay, that's how good it should be, that it should be that easy for you. And then also your employment history and how to articulate that more effectively than most people typically do. So these are the 5 things we're going to be talking about today. Just really quickly as well, very brief admin item. As Bethany said, you all will receive a copy of the recording, but if anyone would like a copy of the PowerPoint presentation so that you can get your hands on, some of the samples that we're going to share here today, but also don't feel like you have to be frantically writing everything down, because that's how I am. I'm a note taker and I'll go crazy with that if I'm not careful. Please feel free to email us at admin@HallieCrawford.com. We would be happy to share a copy of the PowerPoint slides directly with you so you can download those, okay? So let's talk first about resume formatting. And I know that some people probably think this is the fluffy part, so to speak, but it's not. Formatting gives you a really eye-catching presentation that can make a very huge impression on a prospective employer versus a resume that looks like everybody else's or blends in or looks old school and not up to date, or one that has formatting inconsistencies all over it. It's not good. If your resume looks like the rest, it may be hard to distinguish it from everybody else's and not really help you stand out from the crowd on the pile on their desk or desktop, okay? And we see resumes with a lot of different formats these days, and I'm sure you all have too. The next one actually, I'm going to go to the next slide here for just a second. So we have several different templates that we provide to our clients to help them get started with their resume. And some, just by the way, are more creative than others. It just kind of depends, again, on the client's personality type, what's important to them, but also the industry that they're either in or wanting to transition into. This one is a little bit more creative. This is the one that I like a lot that we provide to our clients. And we'll talk more about formatting in just a moment here, but if we look at this template for just a second, you'll notice that there's color. I personally like to have resumes have some kind of color, not 10 different colors, like 1 or 2, and that's it. We're not going for it looking like a circus, okay? And the other thing I like about this is it's very easy to read, and the areas of expertise stand out enormously, the career overview as well. And then this person they're branding themselves by saying who they are, right at the top, account executive, and then also branding themselves here, software sales and solutions account executive, with this summary here too. So this is just one of the examples, and please feel free to email us if you'd like a couple of our resume templates that we recommend. Happy to give that to you. Just email us at the same address, the admin@HallieCrawford.com. But if you notice here, what I want you all to get from this is that resumes look fancier and prettier these days than they used to, and they do need to be visually appealing and look up to date. So if we take a look at this next slide here, some things that you need to avoid and be careful with the formatting that a lot of people will make this mistake is some people will have too many different font styles. You don't want to have that. You need to be consistent with, using either the same font throughout or only 2 fonts throughout. That's it. So don't make it look all willy-nilly all over the place with too many font styles. The other thing that they make a mistake with is they have inconsistent layout throughout, like the margins are different, whatever it is. So you need to be careful with that and make sure that if each section has a header, or you want it to have a header, make sure that that's consistent throughout. Make sure that you have a period at the end of each of your sentences. If you're using those, if you're not, make sure again that it's consistent, that you don't have those. You also need to make sure that your margins are a minimum of 0.6 inches so that there's enough kind of white space in general, but if someone were to print it out, it wouldn't get cut off. Make sure that you use enough of the white space. If you, think about the example that I just showed you, it's readable and there's enough white space that it's visually appealing and easy enough to scan. And then finally, another thing that you want to avoid is underlining. You can use bold, but underlining tends to throw off the ATS scanners that some companies will use to feed your resume through to determine whether to talk to you further or not. And underlining can sometimes throw those off, so you want to be careful about those things. One of the things that I wanted to recommend today that is actually not in the slide, and I'm going to put this in the chat right now, and Bethany, you can help me make sure I do this right, but there's a very cool website that's called jobscan.co, and I'm putting it in the chat box right now, and it is .co, not .com. I don't know why, but that's what it is. But this is a nice, I believe that they'll give you like 1 or 2 free scans of your resume, and they'll even do your cover letter and LinkedIn. They only give a certain amount away for free, but they will scan, it's like an online service, obviously, that will scan your resume for how good it is in terms of the relevant keywords for your industry or the jobs you're going for, but also if it will get by those ATS scanners. So I would highly recommend kind of checking that out. I have one client who just purchased a 3-month membership because he loves this kind of stuff. It's very, very helpful because it does give you specific advice on making adjustments for your resume for that purpose to get by those scanners. Do keep in mind, everyone, that you want to have a couple of different versions of your resume. So for example, the one I showed you before, that's a little bit prettier. This is the type of resume that you would send via email, put it into a PDF or make it into a PDF format, and then send it via email or bring into an interview. But in some cases, as I'm sure you all know, sometimes you have to upload your resume to their format that they want on their job board, on their company website, for example. So you do need to have like just a very basic text version of your website, of your resume as well, in case you need to copy and paste without any formatting, okay? So keep that in mind too. All right, so step number 2 is to think about and really work on branding yourself and your resume as well. So obviously you can't be like this sign on the slide, I'm good at stuff. That's obviously not going to cut it. So branding yourself using your resume is critical as well, because this shows them not just who you are, but like what you bring to the table. You can't just say, you know, account manager kind of, and that's it. You need to explain to them why you would stand out from other account managers, for example, that would be your competition. The idea here is, everyone, that you need to paint the picture for the prospective employer of what it would be like if they hired you as much as you possibly can. Okay, so think about it that way, that you're painting this picture. And if you take a look at this next slide here, in terms of branding, your brand is not just about a branding statement within your professional profile, that summary statement at the top that I showed you just a couple slides ago. It is about that, absolutely. That is part of where your branding statement is going to go, you know, that few sentences about how you stand out, which you can, by the way, leverage as part of your elevator speech when you're talking with and networking with people. But the other way that you can brand yourself is if you take a look at this next slide here, think about your resume as your personal marketing document, and your name almost like is your brand, okay? So 2 things I want to say here, and then Bethany will get to this poll here in just a moment, but a couple of things I want to say. So I was just working with a client this morning talking about her resume, and she's like, I feel like this is just a lot of fluff, and I'm just saying like lingo and, you know, words that don't mean anything. So here's the deal. What I need you all to keep in mind is that if you feel that way about what you're doing with your resume, you have to keep in mind that this is a marketing document, and you are supposed to say these kinds of things that are going to sell you and market you and promote you. And the majority of us are kind of like, we're taught to be humble, right? And sometimes we feel like, oh, this is, you know, fluffy and doesn't mean anything. Try to push against that kind of negative voice in your head, because it is supposed to be a marketing document. Your summary should only be around 3 or 4 sentences anyway, so it's not like you're going to be going on. And that is the point of your resume. So if you feel that way, realize that you are supposed to be saying these things that will help sell you. It is your marketing document. And then the second thing, for this particular slide too, related to branding, is you can do something like this at the top of your resume. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is just an example from one of our clients, is she's got, you know, obviously her name stands out a little bit more because of these shapes here. But the thing that I really wanted to point out to you all is look at how she's got kind of a quick tagline for who she is. That is a really great thing to have on your resume and have it stand out like this, because that tells the prospective employer exactly who you are and what you're known for, which is your elevator speech, right? And then she also has these different kind of keywords here that explain who she is. She's a coach and a facilitator, yes, but she's also great at problem solving and being a visionary, so business strategy, etc. Okay, so it's a really good idea to have something along these lines, even if you don't use these shapes, let's say, and you just said, okay, you know, I'm going to have my name stand out in some way, shape, or form. Having two kind of taglines like this is a really great idea to help you stand out from the crowd, but also let the prospective employer know right away exactly who you are and, you know, what you bring to the table so that they'll want to keep reading. And think about it this way as well, too, is they're making assumptions, but they're also formulating their opinion of you as they go from the top to the bottom of the page of your resume, okay? And you want them to formulate not just a positive opinion, right, but an opinion of you that says they are a good fit for my organization and for the job, right? So the other thing in terms of the branding piece that you want to be careful about is that you don't want to put things on your resume that wouldn't be relevant to the job that you're applying for. Your resume is not everything but the kitchen sink or plus the kitchen sink or whatever that saying is. I always get it wrong. It's not that. You need to have consistent messaging throughout your resume. It's kind of like you're a politician, so to speak, and you want to be saying the same thing over and over. So if, for example, let's say you're going for a project management role, but for some reason in one of your past jobs, you did digital marketing and managed social media, if that's not relevant to the job you're applying for, you need to tone that down in that particular job description and use language that talks more about project management instead. Because if they start thinking about you as a digital media like manager or marketer, they're going to be like, oh, this person isn't a fit. They're looking for the wrong thing, okay? So everything needs to be really consistent. So let's go ahead and get this second poll opened up, Bethany, if we could. And one of the things I did want to remind you of here, everyone, is you do want to have your LinkedIn profile at the top of your resume inside of your header. This is my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, by the way, because we do post a lot of really good articles on LinkedIn. And keep in mind, everyone, too, remember that you can change your LinkedIn profile URL to make it shorter and less gobbledygook numbers and blah, 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 so that when you put it on your resume, it doesn't look as messy. So you can do that in your account settings. And then finally, just so you all know, too, we do have clients who will still put their city and state and maybe even their zip code on their resume. Most people don't put their mailing address anymore. Because they need to have room for LinkedIn, and the mailing address doesn't really matter as much. It's just more of kind of the generic location. Also, for privacy and security purposes, I personally don't like people doing their mailing address. So please participate in this poll if you would for us, because I really would like to know how many people currently have a header on their resume that they feel like brands them, whether it's something similar to this or not. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and fill that out.
I'll give a few more seconds for a few more folks to vote on the poll. Sure. We're at almost 70.
Oh, good. That's really good. And I know I talk a lot, too, so we have to give people a chance to breathe.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and close, and I will share that with you, Hallie, and the rest of the group. So it looks like 19% said yes, they do have a header on their resume that markets them, and then 81% said no.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and thank you all for participating. So we need to do some work here, guys. So this is one of the really, one of the main things I would consider you start working on first, because this can help guide the rest of your resume review, okay, and your updates as you go through it. All right, so let's take a look at the profile summary. So the profile summary, just basically, quick definition of it, is basically a summary at the top of your resume, at the very top, that lets potential employers know right away who you are and what your expertise is, what your strengths and expertise is. And by the way, okay, your personality traits are relevant here as well. So for example, if you are a great team leader or you're a visionary like we talked about before on the slide before, or something else that you might consider like a soft skill, you know, those are relevant too to put in there. Obviously you want to talk about your tangible, you know, hard skills, so to speak, the software that you know, X years of experience, in whatever industry, whatever it is. But just keep in mind that personality traits are really important too, because a lot of times employers will hire you over someone else as long as you all have the same basic qualifications based on what your soft skills are. So let's take a look at a quick profile summary here. So this is another template that some of our clients will use. You'll notice that this one is a little bit more traditional and a little bit more plain. Nothing wrong with that. It's better for more traditional industries like law or financial services, whatever. Again, it depends on your industry and personality, but that's kind of, this one is a little bit more traditional, as we said. And you'll notice that this particular person puts his MBA and certifications or education at the top. That's a really good thing to do. For example, if these items are like bottom line, baseline qualifications for the jobs that you're applying for, you don't have to put them up here. And we have had clients say, gosh, that makes me feel pretentious. Absolutely not. You need to put the relevant items up at the top, okay? This person needs to have their LinkedIn profile. So that would be one of the things that you need to add to this one, okay? And we talked about not having the address. The main thing I want you to get here from this slide, though, is there are kind of two ways that you can do your summary or professional profile. On the other slide that I showed you, it doesn't have two sets of bullet points. It just has one paragraph at the top. I like this one in part because it's got these bolded items. So by the way, with the ATS scanners, you can have bold on your resume. So there's two ways to do it, and it's really, again, up to you. But you can have it as one solid paragraph of like 3 or 4 sentences, or you can lay it out this way. But the point is, you need to focus on the amount of experience that you have, what your soft and hard skills are and your past experience and expertise. And by the way, we do encourage you to have a bulleted list of some kind of your main qualifications for the job that you're applying for. And the way that you want to adjust your resume for each job is you might take some of these items off out of the bulleted list completely, or you might reorder them in terms of priority, okay? As well as adjust some of the keywords in terms of the profile summary. But this gives you another example of how you can lay that out, okay? Just as a quick reminder, if you want any of these examples, you can email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. And we do have a cover letter example that we'd be happy to share with you as well. One of the things I do want to mention really quickly about the cover letter, and then I'll bring up the next slide so you can take a look at that about the summary, is you want to have the header of your cover letter and your resume match everyone. You want them to be the same so that the materials kind of go together and are matchy-matchy, so to speak, okay? So in terms of your profile summary, a couple things you need to keep in mind, that it should answer these questions on this slide. Why should I bother reading this further, go further past the summary? What skills, and that would be, from the employer's perspective, obviously, what skills do you bring to the table and what value do you have that I can use? So literally put yourself in the shoes of the prospective employer and ask yourself the question like, so what? Who cares if this person did this stuff? What is their tangible value that's going to enhance my bottom line in terms of my company, my department, and my organization? And the more you do that, the better able you'll be to write it towards what their perspective will be and talking about what the value is that you provide. Some updates that you want to consider, especially since we're in the new year. You want to make sure that you've done a comprehensive inventory of your skills and achievements for the past year or so, or however long it's been since you updated your resume. We know that, a lot of our clients, when they come to us, they'll be like, well, I've been in a job for the past 10 years or, 8 years or whatever it is, and I haven't updated my resume in a really long time. So if that's the case for you, then you need to make sure that one of the first steps that you take is that you're updating and, writing down any awards that you've achieved or gotten or received, accomplishments in the past several years, certifications or any education, any classes that you took. And make sure also with your resume that you adjust your keywords and your language or lingo inside of your resume to any new terminology that has come out or that is newer within your industry or field, because you want to make sure that you're communicating with them and connecting with them in that way as well. And some things may have changed since you last updated your resume. Tip number 4 out of the 5 that we're going to be talking about today is making sure that your resume is relevant to your industry, but also to the organization that you're applying to, as well as that particular job, okay, the job itself. So think about it as a 3 kind of tiered approach, if you will. It needs to be specific to the industry. It needs to be specific to the organization itself, and talking about any of their, their values or how you can enhance their mission. That's the kind of stuff that you would want to talk about in the summary of your resume, but also in your cover letter as well. And then anything that would be relevant for that particular job. Your resume is not one size fits all. You want to tailor your resume to each position you apply for, as we said. Highlight those relevant skills and expertise for that particular job and company, and make sure that you include quantifiable results for your skills. And we'll get to this third and last poll here in just a moment, everyone. But I want to say something really quickly about the quantifiable results for your skills. And this is going now, we're talking about underneath each of your past job descriptions. So too many of our clients, when they first come to us, will say, or they'll have a bullet point that says, I did this and this, I managed this project and I analyzed the data, blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, okay, well, that's great. But what happened as a result of that? Like, who cares that you did that? Because for all I know, you did a really bad job. I mean, not to be rude to the client, of course, but for all I know, it didn't work out well. So even if you don't feel like you have a quantifiable result, like some people will say, well, Hallie, I'm not a fundraiser, so I can't say I raised this amount of money, or I might not have numbers for my results, and I get that. But for the example that I was just saying, if you managed a project and analyzed the data, like you need to still tell me what result you achieved and for what purpose it was. Did it enable, senior leadership to make a decision about moving forward with a $20 million bid or not, for example? Or did it allow your client to choose between one or another problem that they needed to solve? So just spit it out anyway. Put something down about what the result was, even if it's not quantifiable and you can't point to something, exactly specific. You need to answer, bottom line, and then Bethany, if we can pull up this last poll here, that'd be great. You need to answer with each of your bullet points under your jobs, everybody, the so what question. So go line by line through it and say, well, so what? Who cares? What happened as a result of this? And as much as you possibly can, kind of spit that out for yourself, okay? So Bethany, if we could do the third poll. The question here, everyone, is, does anyone have a master copy of their resume? And, oh, sorry, I need to explain what this is. I apologize. What I mean by a master copy of your resume is, everyone, you want to have one copy of your resume that has everything on it, that you can then create all of your other resumes for the different jobs from that master resume. So it has all of the content and you can kind of pick and choose, copy and paste what you want. That is the best way to stay organized with updating your resume and adjusting it for each position, so that you're not hunting and pecking and saying, okay, well, this one is similar to this other one. You have every single thing in one master copy of it that you do not touch, and you create all your resumes from that. Now, please go ahead and participate in the poll. I apologize, I should have explained that first. So we're looking for, if you have kind of one master version, if you will, that you don't mess with too much, and that you create all of your other resumes from that one.
All right, we've got most people responded, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. and I'll share
Cool.
the results. So it looks like 83% do have a master copy, and 17% do not have a master copy of their resume.
Yay, I love that answer. That's fantastic. Good for you guys. That's awesome. So keep in mind, even for those of you that already have one, that's great. If you are applying for or looking at two different kind of career directions for yourself and two different types of jobs, if you will, it's okay to have like two different master resumes. Like for example, for me, I might have one that's for coaching and one that's for teaching. And I've got two separate master copies that I then leverage from, from that point. And for those of you that don't, obviously this is one of the things that you want to work on. Okay, so let's talk about the last tip here and your employment history. We talked a little bit about it already with the so what question. I'm going to give you a couple more things that you need to think about here. So in terms of the relevance, you want to make sure that you have any updates for the new year, remove any outdated information, irrelevant jobs or information like we talked about. Remember, as they're scanning through it, you want to make sure everything is relevant. And this is especially true, okay, if you're changing career paths. So you want to make sure that you reword things and ensure that everything is going to be relevant for that new career path for you if you're changing kind of directions, okay? So make sure that you delete anything that either is outdated, and by the way, usually older than 10 years, people will leave off their resume. Anything since then, still keep on there, okay? And then obviously make sure that anything that's not relevant, like we said, either remove it. If there's a job, by the way, and I'll get to the next slide here, if there's a job, by the way, on there that is, you want to make sure that you don't show a gap in employment, but the job in and of itself was less relevant to the direction that you're, going for and applying for. What you can do is you can just shorten that description and have it be like 1 or 2 bullet points, and that's it. So that, again, it doesn't diffuse the message. And just by the way, too, everyone, you want all of your keywords and the relevant items that an employer might search for, like keywords finding you online or whatever, those need to be at the top half of the first page of your resume, because that's where they're going to be looking the most and where the scanners will look too. There are 3 ways to highlight your job history on the next slide here. There's a chronological resume, there's a functional resume, there's a hybrid resume. Chronological is basically date order, highlights steady growth and advancements if you're staying in the right or in the same career path that you've been in before. That's the one you want to use. That's the most common. Functional focuses on skills and functions. If you're looking to change your direction, you want to look at a functional resume instead, so that you're highlighting instead of things in date order, but the things that would be most relevant to the job you're applying for. And then a hybrid is a combination of the chronological and functional. Okay, let's take a look at these for just a moment. The chronological resume, in terms of the tips here, you want to make sure that everything is, obviously this is the date order one. You want to make sure a couple of things I'll point out here, that your sentences always start with active verbs. You want to do this across all the resumes, obviously. And select the biggest accomplishments that would best highlight, what would be relevant for that particular job, okay? And we talked about including measurable results wherever possible. So wherever you do have measurable results and can give numbers, even for the number of team members that you manage, or the number of projects that you handled, put those in too. It doesn't have to just be about a result. It can be like the scope of work, and that's where we talk about the scope here at the top. Next, with a functional resume, some of the basics. You want to list your work history, but what you want to do is list the positions that are relevant together under a titled heading like relevant project management experience or something like that. And so normally with a functional resume, people will put the relevant experience at the top and then, a separate section underneath of other professional experience. So it'll be sectioned off in kind of 2 categories of the most relevant and then less relevant closer to the bottom. And then with a hybrid resume, you can keep the sections of a chronological resume, okay, but you can use your bullets to highlight your skills a little bit differently. And we've got a couple of examples of this, just by the way, so you can see what we're talking about. Just email us for those. But you can use, these are 2 examples of how you could highlight your skills and your strengths closer to the top and talk about, okay, these are the qualifications I bring to the table, and then you can have your chronological, format of your resume below, but those sections are a little bit shorter because you've already, excuse me, talked about what your strengths and skills are at the top. All right, so really quickly, one of the things I wanted to mention, and then I've got a couple more suggestions about a hybrid resume. If any of you feel like you need kind of additional specific individual support with anything we've talked about today, or anything else career-wise or job search-wise, we do offer for you all a complimentary career session that I'd be happy to do with you. To get that set up with us, it's admin@HallieCrawford.com, same email as everything else. But especially if you feel like I need individual tailored advice to something, happy to chat with you about that, okay? So with a hybrid resume, this is one of the ways that you can lay this out. You can have, your job title with the dates that you have been in that type of job, and then you can have the different companies that you are working for underneath that. So just bottom line, there's different ways to organize your resume so that it's tailored in the right way to sell yourself to the prospective employer, again, depending on whether you're looking to change careers or not. So this is another way that you can format your employment history, just by the way, to give you another example, okay? Really quickly too, I wanted to offer you all as well, if anyone feels like, oh my gosh, this is totally overwhelming, we do have resume writers on our team that do resume and LinkedIn writing. Happy to offer you all a $20 off coupon for those services. Just mention that in the subject line of the email, and send us your resume as well. I can give you a quick price quote and we can go from there. I'm not going to walk you through this next sample resume too much because you can get this sample in Word from us after the webinar, but this is the rest of Joe Smith's resume. So it just gives you a couple of other examples and ways that you can lay out your work experience at the end. You'll notice with him, he has bolded words at the beginning of each, which highlight and brand him as well. And then normally, just by the way, if you've had multiple years of work experience after you've graduated from UGA, you can, and people will typically put their education at the bottom, and then awards and distinctions, at the bottom as well, okay? Quick extra tips, and then we'll start to move towards Q&A here, is you want to make sure that you proofread it, but not just you. You need to have somebody else proofread it, because I can't tell you the number of times a client will send us their resume, they think it's all done, and they realize, oh, I'll see something that they missed. So it's just typical and normal. Normally, like around a 12-point font is good. You can get as small as 11, but I wouldn't go too much smaller than that. And these are some good fonts that we recommend that are just kind of basic and straightforward. Obviously, when you're printing it out for an interview, make sure it's on high quality paper, and make sure too, we talked about this before, that your cover letter should have the same formatting as your resume, header and otherwise. So just as a quick reminder, the reason why, your resume is so important, because I know it may feel like, gosh, this is a lot of work. If you take a look at some of these statistics at the bottom of the slide here, it's so important, because a lot of people are eliminated by those ATS systems, which is why I gave you the jobscan.co. Too many, and a lot of companies, almost all of them, honestly, are going to be looking at you on social media as well as LinkedIn. So you need to make sure, by the way, that your social media is cleaned up, and LinkedIn as well as your resume. And as we all know, only a certain number, a handful of people actually get an interview. So this is why once you get this done, everybody, you'll be able to hit the ground running with your job search. This is the hard part at the beginning, doing this legwork, and then it does get easier, okay? So let's go ahead and let's get to the Q&A portion, Bethany, if we could, so that we've got some time to answer some people's questions. And just as a quick reminder, if you want the slides or any of the resources, I am just going to pull up our contact info here on this next slide so that everyone has the email to, if we don't get to your question today, you can feel free to email me a question later on. I'm happy to respond to it. So Bethany, what have we got in terms of questions, if any, yet?
Yes, one question just came in. So how do you make a LinkedIn profile different from a resume?
Yeah, great question. So the easiest thing to do to update your resume, update your LinkedIn after you've done your resume is it is okay as a start to just copy and paste your resume over to get you going and have it be, looking better than it maybe was before. The majority of what is going to be different on your LinkedIn is your About section on LinkedIn at the top, because you can get a little bit more personal with that and talk about why you're passionate about your industry or the jobs that you're looking for. And you still want to have a lot of like similar things like, key areas of expertise and qualifications, but you can talk a little bit more on LinkedIn about your career trajectory. Use first person, get a little bit more personal to connect with the person that's reading your LinkedIn profile, and talk about why you're enthusiastic or passionate about what you do. That's one of the main differences, okay? But then a lot of times, people will have under their employment history, they'll have for the most part the same kind of material underneath that. And I personally, the thing with, and you'll read different things online, but I personally feel like, what if someone finds you on LinkedIn and they don't have your resume? You want them to have all of the, the information that you want them to be able to understand and read about you. So that's one of the main differences is the About section at the top. Hopefully that gives you a start.
We had another question come in that I thought was great. So when is it okay to have a resume that's longer than one page?
If you have had more than 2 to 3 years of work experience, go to 2 pages. So usually a one pager is typically for a more recent college grad. There are some recruiters that will say for certain industries, oh, you're only supposed to have one page. I hear that very, very rarely. So please know that a 2-pager is typically the most common and standard, unless you're a very recent college grad. Great question.
Another question that came in that I thought was great is, how do you put on a resume any time you may have spent at home as a caregiver?
Yep. So what I would actually do is put it on there, and almost like it would be the same formatting as the jobs that you've got listed on there. Not because you're trying to pretend like it was a, professional position that you were paid for, but just for that consistency of formatting. But I would say something about it in your cover letter, and that I would actually list it, excuse me, with the time frame that you did that, and just reference, caregiver for elderly family member, or whatever the situation was, and then just have a little line underneath that explaining the situation. You don't need to get too personal with it, but just say, took a sabbatical from work for X amount of time in order to care for elderly family member, for this purpose or whatever it was. Short and sweet, again, doesn't have to get too personal, but I would list it there so that it kind of covers what the gap in the, so that there's not just a gap in your work history and experience. And this is where you may want to have a little bit of a hybrid resume of the functional and chronological, where you may want to put at the top what kind of your qualifications are and any classes that you've taken in the meantime, anything that might show that you're still kind of keeping your fingers in the working world, that you can include that there too. Great question.
Yeah, and also I'm assuming the same would apply for stay-at-home parent, and
Yep.
if they've volunteered on groups or were still a part or something, or managing the household. I've seen household manager as a title before, which I thought was interesting, so just FYI, but yeah, it's a good question.
Yep. Good question, and it's relevant for those.
Yes. So what tips do you have for making sure a resume will be picked up by the automated systems, the ATS systems?
Keywords are at the top half of the page, not using underlining, but it's mostly going to be the keywords that are, that are prevalent in the job description that, that you're applying for, you know, the job for the job description that you're applying for. So the main thing is make sure that the keywords are at the top. And then I would leverage the jobscan.co because they'll actually tell you if there's something wrong with it and what you need to change and do specifically for your individual resume, any other changes that you need to make. But the majority of the time, it's going to be the right keywords that it will get picked up.
Really great advice. Should you include volunteer experience? Oh, one second. Sorry, it went away. Should you include volunteer experience for a professional job?
Yes, I absolutely would. Like if the volunteer experience is going to be relevant to the position that you're applying for, absolutely include it, definitely. Because if it, you know, demonstrates a skill that you obtained or that you know, can demonstrate that I'm really good at this and I leveraged it as well in my volunteer work, that's fine. Absolutely include it. Just be clear that it was a volunteer position. You know, don't try to pretend, obviously, like it was something paid.
Right. Another great question came through, Hallie. There's some good ones, so bear with me.
No problem.
This person's been through several mergers or VC investments. Is it okay to add that you weren't let go of a job because of performance, but rather due to the merger or the VC buyout?
Yeah, I would reference that in the cover letter, but I would also say, I mean, normally you would say something about that if there was a gap in employment, though. You know, normally you're not going to point out why you're no longer there. If there's some reason that you really do feel like you need to point out that you're no longer there, yes, it's fine to say reduction in workforce due to merger or whatever it is. But normally people are, and this is the kind of situation where I may need to talk with you about it further to get what the background is. But normally you would put something like that only if there's a gap in the employment that you want to explain, I wasn't fired or whatever it is. So the short answer is yes, you can put that in there.
Right. And this kind of leads to another question that came up. How do you handle current unemployment, perhaps for a couple of years, in a LinkedIn profile and a resume? And should you include a statement that you're looking for work in XYZ field in the About section of your LinkedIn profile?
Definitely include it, that, what you're looking for. I would also just put anything that you have been doing to fill that gap in work history, if possible. I have had some people be like, okay, well, I'm going to make up a company that I've been running and pretend like I've been doing consulting and that kind of thing. To me, that's, unless you actually have done something, like that's fudging and it's too close to, you're being dishonest. So I wouldn't recommend that. But if there is something that you could put in there as if it was a job, like volunteer work or anything, or classes that you've been taking during that time, I would put that in there if that's applicable.
Yeah, and there was actually another question just about where to draw the line on kind of the fluff and making yourself sound maybe better, and then lying.
Yeah, and that's something too. I may need to look at specifically, like the language and lingo that you're kind of looking at and asking about together. But like the basic gist is like, you can't say that you have a strength that you don't have, or say that you have experience that you don't have. But a lot of times people are just not as comfortable selling themselves because they feel like, it's the majority of the time people are being too humble, I guess is what I would say. So the line is, you can't say something that you did something or performed a task or have a strength or whatever that you just don't have, and if you've only managed 2 projects over time, you can't say you're an experienced project manager. So that would be kind of the best way I think I can answer.
Yeah, totally agree.
Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
I think this will probably be the last question,
okay.
But how do you prepare a resume when you're looking to transition to an entirely new career path that you don't have direct experience in?
That would be where you want to do the functional resume or the hybrid resume that we talked about. So if you're trying to transition over, you want to either choose a functional completely functional or hybrid, so that you're highlighting the most relevant experience that you have, whatever it is that you might have, that you're highlighting those things first, instead of having it just be strictly chronological. You need to choose one of those formats.
All really great advice, Hallie, and I think that has answered all of the questions that came in, and
cool.
Just wanted to thank you again so much for offering again your expertise and your advice on kind of making the resume stand out. Do you have any last parting words of wisdom for the group?
Take it step by step and baby steps. Break it down. Start with the summary first. Give it a few days and then come back to it again. Too overwhelming to try to do it all at once.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thanks everyone again for participating in today's webinar. And as Hallie mentioned, I'll be sending out the recording. And then if you wanted to follow up with her, you've got her email address there to follow up with HallieCrawford.com. All right. Well, thanks everyone so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for coming.